In the dawn of time, when the earth was young and few were its inhabitants, there lived a man named Lamech. He walked among tents and fields, under a sky so vast that when he looked up, he could almost hear the silence of the universe. Lamech was a descendant of Cain, and his life was deeply marked by the shadow of his ancestor. The stories of his family were passed down from generation to generation, like a breeze whispering harsh truths among the trees. Among rustic caves and green valleys, Lamech built his home with his own hands. He was a strong and vigorous man, but he carried a heavy burden in his heart, as if he were carrying invisible stones. He had 2 wives, Ada and Zillah. Ada was kind and loving, her eyes shining with hope as she contemplated the future of her children. Zillah, on the other hand, was wise and soft-spoken, skilled at dealing with her husband's anxieties and the doubts that hung over the man who carried so many responsibilities. Lamech watched his children grow up. Jabal, the firstborn, raised the first flocks and became the father of shepherds, learning from the winds the best way to lead the sheep to green pastures. Jubal, the second, invented harps and flutes, filling the nights with songs and giving humanity the gift of music. Tubal-Cain, the youngest, became a smith of iron and bronze instruments, transforming raw ore into tools and weapons. Tubal-Cain had steady hands, and his gaze determined the course of the flames, shaping the impossible into something useful. It was a family that, with their hands and hearts, helped build the foundations of the world. But despite their achievements, Lamech was tormented by the violence that marked his lineage. One day, overcome by anger and fear, he wounded a man and killed him because he felt threatened. The weight of this act fell on his shoulders like a dark cloak. He called his wives and spoke words that would echo for generations. "Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. If Cain shall be avenged 7 times, I shall be avenged 70 times 7. It was not pride in what he had done, but a heavy conscience, a heart torn between the desire for justice and the legacy of error. Lamech sought redemption, wanting his children to follow different paths than his, to find peace where he saw only unrest. Every night, he stared at the starry sky, asking himself if his family's fate was sealed by Cain's past or if a new beginning was possible. The lesson that emerged from Lamech's story was clear: choices have consequences, and we are not bound by the weight of our mistakes. We can seek redemption and a new beginning, teaching our children to choose life over violence. As the years passed, Lamech remained there, between a past marked by blood and the hope of a new tomorrow forged by his hands and those of his children. But what would happen when a new choice was imposed on the family? What would Lamech do when faced with the possibility of breaking the cycle of the past? The days passed slowly and silently, and each dawn imposed on Lamech the need to reflect. The man who had known strength in creation now sought direction in the silence of the nights. He watched each sun with hope and fear, wondering if they would be able to escape the burden he carried. Jabal, guiding his flocks under the sun, seemed far removed from the shadows of the past. He was busy caring for life, teaching respect and love for animals. Jubal used music to transform sadness into hope, and each melody blew a promise of better times around him. Tubal-Cain, in the heat of the forge, struck with his hammer not only to shape weapons, but to create tools that could open paths and cultivate the hard soil. Even so, the memory of Lamech's act of violence hung over the fields and tents like a ghost. Ada, worried about her husband, sought to comfort his heart, showing him that protection for the family can come from gestures of tenderness and forgiveness. Zillah, with her quiet wisdom, approached Lamech one day by the evening fire and spoke of the power of starting over. She emphasized that no one was eternally bound to their mistakes, and that God watches every effort to change and build something new, even when all seems lost. These words brought relief to Lamech's heart. He realized that he could teach his children and grandchildren different values. In the presence of the 3, he gathered his family and told them honestly about his anger, his regret, and his desire to break the cycle of violence. He asked them to cultivate what was good: music, work, and care for life. Some nights, Lamech would sit with Jubal and listen to new songs that spoke of hope and new beginnings. Other times, he walked through the fields with Jabal and learned to see in daily care a new chance to do good. With Tubal-Cain, he talked about how tools do not need to be used only for battle, but can transform and build. Lamech finally understood that the past can be overcome by example and by the love transmitted to descendants. As time passed, he looked at his children and saw in them the reflection of his redemption. But one day, a great threat arose in the land, forcing Lamech to decide whether to apply the forgiveness and wisdom he had learned or to give in again to the old cycle he so desired to break. The gusty wind that morning brought news of unrest. A group of strangers was approaching Lamech's lands, advancing through the fields where the grass was greenest and even the wild animals fought for it. Jabal noticed it first. His sheep were frightened, and a strange tension hung in the air. He ran to warn his father, who, upon hearing his son's words, felt a familiar chill run down his spine, the same one he had felt on the day he gave in to anger. Ada looked him in the eyes, seeing there the doubt between fear and courage. Jubal pressed his harp against his chest, praying that this would not end in screams, but in dialogue. Tubal-Cain, upon hearing of the threat, went straight to his forge, his hands already searching for his hammer, but he hesitated under the watchful eyes of his mother and father. When the strangers arrived at the entrance to the village, demanding passage and part of the herds, a heavy silence fell. Lamech found himself once again facing the cycle he feared so much, the threat, the possibility of losing everything, and the choice between responding with violence or trying something new. For a moment, his fist clenched, his heart racing, remembering the blood spilled years before. But behind him, his children's eyes showed hope and expectation, not of war, but of change. Ada touched his shoulder lightly, and that gesture was enough for Lamech to take a deep breath and step forward. Instead of shouting or raising his hands, he raised his voice in a firm but unhateful tone. He spoke of the importance of living in peace, of sharing what was possible, and of not repeating old mistakes. He offered the strangers a fair share of the resources in exchange for everyone's safety, inviting them to sit down and listen to the songs Jubal knew how to sing. The men, suspicious at first, were softened by Lamech's sincerity and the gentle sound of the music, which spoke of the value of life and forgiveness. Tubal-Cain brought water and some forge tools, showing that strength also builds, not just destroys. At that moment, Lamech realized that his redemption was being built step by step, before his family and strangers. A new decision was being made, and the choice for reconciliation began to open paths to a different future. However, inside Lamech's heart, there was still fear. Would that choice be enough to break the old cycle once and for all? Time would soon reveal how far his faith would take him. On the night following the encounter with the strangers, Lamech hardly slept. The distant echo of Jubal's songs mingled with the silence of the darkness, bringing old anxieties to the surface. Sitting at the edge of the field, he felt the weight of so many generations on his shoulders, the cold breath of doubt and the timid warmth of hope that barely dared to grow. So many times he had dreamed of the face of the man he had hurt. So many times he had questioned whether there really was redemption for hearts marked by error. His gaze sought the stars, as if waiting for an answer that only the heavens could give. While the camp rested, Lamech was surprised by slow footsteps. Zillah approached, seeing her husband's internal battle. She sat down beside him, bringing with her the calm that usually comes only in moments of sincere sharing. Zillah said that even though she feared her own ghosts, she had learned to trust that real change happens quietly, in everyday decisions, even when the fruits of those decisions are not immediately visible. She shared her own fears and how she found strength in looking at her children, living works of a new time. Lamech, touched by her words, shed tears he had long held back. He felt stripped of pride, like a naked man facing the truth. For the first time, he accepted pain not as punishment, but as the seed of possible renewal if he had the courage to remain steadfast in his purpose. At daybreak, a new challenge revealed itself. The strangers, now resting around the village, began to cause discord among the residents themselves. There were disagreements over pastures, arguments over the use of the tools that had been lent, and old suspicions reignited among those who, out of fear or greed, doubted the peace that had been offered. Lamech realized that a bold choice in the face of strangers was not enough. It was necessary to maintain trust, preserve understanding, and above all, lead by example. It was tempting to give in to anger and frustration, but he remembered Ada's advice. The leader who keeps his word, even in the face of doubt, is the one who leaves a legacy more lasting than gold. With Jabal and Tubal-Cain, he gathered the men of the village and the strangers around the fire, allowing each one to express their doubts, fears, and hopes. Jubal, playing softly, helped the voices find rhythm. Lamech humbly acknowledged the limitations of coexistence but pleaded for mutual commitment, guided by understanding. That night, the smoke from the fire mixed with promises and tears. Lamech felt himself growing not only as a repentant leader, but as a man willing to fight for the greater good, even without guarantees of victory. And as the stars shone again over the village, Lamech understood. The journey to break cycles is long and painful, but hope is born every time one chooses forgiveness, not only for others, but for oneself. Dawn brought a heavy sky, gray as if the heavens bore witness to the restless mood among the men. The buzz grew in Lamech's village, where residents and outsiders were already arguing before the sun even rose. One of the shepherds unjustly accused an outsider of stealing animals. Voices rose until they were lost in threats and hatred. Lamech ran to meet the crowd, feeling the weight of responsibility tighten his chest. He found everyone excited, men with stones in their hands, others ready to fight back. Tubal-Cain tried to pull his friend away from a fight. Jubal raised his voice above the shouting, trying to calm things down. Jabal kept the children away, his eyes fixed on his father, waiting for direction. Amid the turmoil, Lamech stood before the men, arms open, voice firm despite his fear. He asked them to listen, asked for a truce, sharing his own violent past to remind them of the danger of letting anger rule. He spoke of the blood that had stained his hands and, before everyone, confessed how terrible the weight of guilt had been. He looked into each of their eyes and begged that his family not be remembered only as descendants of vengeance, but as those who had the courage to change. A gust of wind blew strongly, carrying dust and dry leaves, and with it a brief silence fell over the people. At that moment, a cry rang out from the field. A child had fallen near the well, and in the confusion, no one had noticed the danger. Without hesitation, Lamech ran, pushing through the men, and threw himself to the ground to pull the little girl out before she drowned. The people watched, motionless, the scene filled with fear and compassion. When Lamech emerged, wet and panting, carrying the child safe in his arms, tears ran down his face. The girl's mother knelt at his feet, thanking him in tears, and even the strangers, dejected, lowered their improvised weapons. The gesture cut through vanities and resentments, uniting everyone in reverent silence. At that moment, something changed deeply within them. They realized how fragile they were in the face of life, how compassion is capable of breaking down the highest walls. Lamech felt the presence of something greater, almost palpable, a veil of reconciliation hovering over the place. A brief prayer was said, not asking for anything, but giving thanks. The miracle there was not only the rescue of the child, but the spark of true change lit in their hearts. The old cycle was beginning to unravel, and Lamech understood that redemption is a daily achievement, made up of small choices and big gestures, even when doubt still lingers. Time passed in Lamech's village like a river that, after a storm, slowly seeks its old course. The atmosphere, once marked by tension, was now one of mutual vigilance and care. The hurts still existed, but they seemed softened by recent events. Among all, Lamech was the quietest, his soul spending nights in prayer, words whispered to the wind before the stars. He sought a meaning that went beyond the fragile truce, a direction that would free him from the shadows of his ancestors. He felt God's presence in subtle ways, the way the dew sparkled on the leaves in the morning, the comfort in Ada's gaze after each difficult night, the vigor in Tubal-Cain's calloused arms, who now helped strangers and villagers tame the land together, like brothers. One early morning, Lamech was overcome by an intense dream. He saw himself walking through a vast desert with no horizon, his past accompanied by his own mistakes and nightmares haunting him like long shadows. In the midst of the aridity, he heard a powerful voice, soft as the wind but firm as rock. "Fear not, for those who recognize their mistakes and seek forgiveness will be given a new chance." Lamech fell to his knees and, in the dust, wept not only for what he had done, but for what he wanted to build. The voice said again, "Your descendants will not only inherit guilt, but also the courage to start over." When he awoke, his chest felt light, as if an ancient weight had been lifted. The morning dawned golden, the air fresh and intense. Lamech gathered his family and the entire village, asking for a moment of silence. He told them about the dream, about the voice he had heard, and his certainty that he had been called to renewal. He proposed that, on that day, everyone dedicate themselves to restoring wounded relationships, offering help to those they had hurt, sharing food, and extending a hand to those they had previously despised. The village hesitated, but looking at Lamech, they saw not just a man marked by the past, but someone transformed by faith and a sincere desire for reparation. On that day, they prayed together for the first time, hands clasped under the open sky. Each request, each thanksgiving rose like incense, and the silence that followed seemed to be God's answer. Peace was possible. There, among the valleys and fields, God acted in humility, reconciliation, and the faith of a people and their leader. Lamech stood with eyes full of hope, certain that even amid failures, it was possible to open a path of blessing for those who would come after him. The days after the collective prayer dawned under a serene and renewed light. Tensions gave way to gentler looks, to mutual efforts to rebuild broken relationships. However, Lamech's heart still harbored unease. He wandered through the fields at dusk, guided by the silence among the trees, feeling the wind sway the grass as if each breath whispered ancient truths. The guilt, once unbearable, now seemed to teach, not punish. He saw his sons absorbing new lessons. Jabal taught shepherds and strangers to care for the flocks together, sharing techniques and trust. Jubal gathered people from different backgrounds around soft sounds that crossed the barriers of fear and suspicion. Cain forged tools to share, not to hurt. Lamech watched, feeling something unusual sprouting. Pride, even gratitude, as past wounds became seeds of strength. One such afternoon, a violent storm gathered over the plain. The wind howled, dark clouds swirled, and thunder made everyone's skin bristle. Men and women ran to protect their livestock and reinforce their huts. Lamech, feeling compelled, went out alone to meet the storm, feeling the first heavy raindrops on his face. He stopped in the center of a clearing, looked up at the dark sky, and, seized by sudden courage, raised his voice. He begged God to clear his understanding, to reveal the meaning of every struggle, loss, and obstinacy. Lightning flashed across the sky, and amid the thunder, Lamech heard, not with his ears, but in his heart, a silent answer. Something whispered that all suffering, all pain, had led to this moment of surrender, recognizing that redemption did not erase the past, but gave a new direction to the present. The storm subsided as abruptly as it had begun. A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds and outlined the silhouette of Lamech standing alone, but finally whole. The people gathered around him, moved by the silent vibration that hung in the air. Lamech then felt clearly that he had never walked alone. His mistakes had led him to humility. His search had awakened in the hearts of others the hope and courage to start over. With tears in his eyes, he called Ada, Zillah, his children, and all the people to him. There, before the village, he confessed his transformation, gave thanks for his suffering, and announced that he wished to be remembered not for his anger, but for the day he learned to love. The cycle was broken. The people responded with hugs, spontaneous songs from Jubal's lips, and the community celebrated not only a renewed leader, but a new era born for all of them. The days passed, and under the peaceful sky, the village was transformed. What had once been fear and division was now care. The mornings were filled with the sound of collaborative work. Voices intertwined as men and women joined forces to rebuild bridges and huts, and children played on the riverbanks without fear, sharing laughter with the children of outsiders. Ada smiled more often, seeing Jabal share his wisdom of herding, outsiders and locals side by side, forming a stronger and more protected herd. Zillah, attentive to the people's pain, led conversation circles, where old disagreements were washed away with sincere words and eye contact. Jubal prepared melodies in the late afternoon, when the residents gathered around the fire, listening to the harmony of the songs and discovering how music soothed the most restless creating invisible bonds between hearts that had once been hardened. Cain, with his skilled hands, taught young people and adults how to work iron to create plows and tools of peace, forever marking a new history, from weapons of defense to sources of life. Lamech, always present, now walked with calm steps among the people. His gaze no longer carried the weight of past guilt, but a humble gratitude for every small reconciliation, for every spark of restored trust. He often sought a place high on the hill to pray in silence, where he felt the gentle breeze and gave thanks not for the forgetting of his pains, but for the grace of having learned from each one of them. Little by little, he had become an advisor to the afflicted, a model of patience in the face of others' faults, an example of someone who broke the cycle of violence with compassion and perseverance. The children ventured further afield, safe under watchful eyes and inspired by the stories told around the campfire, legends no longer marked by revenge, but by the living memory of forgiveness and new beginnings. And so the village flourished, each day a small victory, each gesture of tenderness secure, as if everything there were reborn in the shadow of faith, love, and courage that Lamech had finally learned to cultivate and share. In the silent dawn, as the mist caressed the fields and only the song of crickets filled the air, Lamech awoke on the threshold between dream and wakefulness, feeling a serene restlessness within him, unlike any he had ever felt before. Without hesitation, he walked to the center of the village, where a nearly extinct fire still trembled weakly beneath the ashes. There, he knelt and whispered words of gratitude until an unexpected gust of wind rekindled the fire, spreading soft light all around. Gradually, residents were drawn to the discreet glow. Ada and Zila, the children, the elders, and the young, even the outsiders. One by one, they arrived, gathering in respectful silence, as if sensing the difference in that dawn. The sky, still dark, began to clear of clouds, revealing an intense strip of golden light on the horizon. Jubal took his instrument and, almost without thinking, strummed notes that rose like a prayer. A sublime melody filled the space and brought tears to the eyes of many. Jabal sang a song of hope, followed by the voices of his brothers, their mothers, and finally the entire village, a people marked by scars, now united by the power of forgiveness. At the height of that union, a child ran through the clearing holding a lamb in his arms, both faces illuminated by the rising sun. The animal leaped toward the people and rested at Lamech's feet, who knelt down, touching its soft wool tenderly, feeling the warmth pulsing between his fingers like a promise fulfilled. The eyes of the village turned, and in that instant an inexplicable peace enveloped everyone, as if a veil of pain had been lifted from the past, revealing only a present full of hope. The old men smiled, the children ran free, and even the foreigners, who had been suspicious, approached, offering bread and fruit in a spontaneous sharing. Lamech raised his eyes to the sky washed by the first rays of light, feeling certain that the ancient curse had finally vanished. There was no voice from above, no great wonders, but every heart present felt, with almost palpable depth, that a miracle had happened. Hatred had been overcome by compassion, and the promise of a new beginning, engraved for generations, was finally fulfilled among them, sustaining every glance, every gesture, every beat of renewed faith. The sun broke through the morning with intense light, and its brightness drew new contours on the faces of the villagers. The village, which for so long had been shrouded in shadows of fear and resentment, now exuded lightness. The fields were blooming. Hands that had once wielded stones or iron now lifted crops and caressed children, and the cycle of the past seemed finally broken. Lamech sat under the old palm tree, watching life pulsate around him, Ada smiling, Zilla counseling young people, Jabal gathered with the shepherds in light conversation, Jubal teaching children to sing, Cain sharpening tools of peace. The silence was one of fulfillment, not fear. Lamech finally understood that redemption did not come from forgetting his mistakes, but from the courage to turn them into living lessons. The stories of hatred that had haunted Cain's lineage for so long were overcome by acts of kindness and perseverance. Now, future generations would learn not to avenge suffering, but to overcome it with compassion and hard work. The children sang and played around the well where tragedy had almost struck. At night, Around the campfire, the elders reminisced about the time when anger controlled destinies and how, with humility and faith, the village chose a new path. Lamech's example was not that of a perfect man, but of a man who fell and rose again, who understood that every pain could become the seed for a new fruit. The miracle did not lie in grand gestures, but in the slow and vigorous recovery of relationships between people, in the daily courage to forgive and start over, and in the faith that love conquers even the oldest curses. A gentle breeze blew at the end of that day, carrying silent prayers of gratitude and renewing the certainty that, between valleys and fields, a new story was being written in every shared glance. And so life went on, not without challenges, but full of purpose, offering everyone the chance to choose between repetition and renewal, always following the path of hope. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and overcoming adversity, don't forget to like it, comment on what you thought, and subscribe to the channel to hear more inspiring stories like this one.